if you don't mind, just make sure that when you go to your chat, let's have everybody adjust to all panelists and attendees. And let's go ahead and just let us know where you're from there in the chat, if you don't mind. I just wrote hello students there. Just make sure that when you go to your So hey students, for those of you joining us, please go ahead and find your way to the chat button and adjust to all panelists and attendees, and go ahead and let us know where you're from there in the chat. We definitely want to interact with you, get your questions today. We want to get to know where you're from. All right, hello there, Prisha from California. Wonderful. All right. Seeing some chats come through here. So we're going to go ahead and get started at 7 p.m. on the dot. So we're just going to let our attendees trickle in. So just letting everybody know, please make your way over to the chat button there and click on all panelists and attendees. All right. So it looks like we have, it looks like Kiowa from Rochester. We have Hugh in Seattle, Wing in San Jose, sunny San Francisco. Hello, Keely. Richa here from India. Thank you for being here. All right. So we'll go ahead and get started in 2 minutes here at 7 o'clock on the dot. Just want to make sure everybody knows where to go. Make sure you make your way to that chat button. We're going to have a wonderful group here tonight to spend some quality time with you all. We want to make sure that we answer your questions, we interact with you. We want to make this a fun event tonight. So please feel free to make sure that you're interacting with us in the chat button. If you're just joining us, make your way to the chat button and click on all panelists and attendees. Hello there, Mia from Brazil, currently in LA. Megan in Maryland. Tara, nice to see you all. Guan from California. Karina in Minnesota. All right. People from all over the globe here tonight. This is great. Hello from San Francisco. What's up, Dave? And Jason in Nashville. Thanks for being here. So we'll go ahead and get started in like 2 more minutes here. We have our director of the School of Landscape Architecture here joining us tonight, Miss Heather Clendenin, and Eric Arneson is going to be here as well. So it's going to be pretty fun event here, guys. So just hang on. We'll get started here in just a few minutes. Hey, Lulu there in Nebraska. All right. They all came to see you, Heather.
Hi, everybody.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started here in just one last second here, just waiting for all of our attendees to join us at 7. And I'll say this one last time for everybody, if you didn't hear me already, just make sure that you're adjusting your chat to all panelists and attendees. So hey, Caesar, good example, just adjust that to all panelists and attendees. This way, everybody can see the chat. It helps keep everything in the chat so we can answer all the questions for everybody. Hello there in Bolivia and Louisiana. Thanks for joining us. All right, so it's 7 on the dot. We'll go ahead and get started. So everybody, my name is Hector Verdugo. I'm the Senior Vice President of Admissions here at Academy of Art University here in San Francisco, California, USA. Thank you so much for joining us. I know we have an international population out there today. I've seen Mexico, I've seen India, Bolivia, tons of different places all over the United States. So thank you so much for joining us. We love having these events. We love to get a chance to talk to prospective students, current students. It doesn't matter. It's always a good time. Tonight's event should be a big hit, the art and science of trees. Before we get started, I do want to address a couple of housekeeping things for everybody. I always get asked this. Everybody will receive a copy of this recording, so no need to worry about it. Whatever email that you use to sign up for this event, you will get a copy of this recording sent to that email by tomorrow. So no need to worry about it. Everybody will have a copy. You will be able to reference this on YouTube as well later at a later time. So just know everything we talk about today. It's all about having fun and learning and interacting. You will be able to go back and reference everything later. The next thing is we obviously can't hear or see you. So the way that we can make this fun is we definitely want the chat to be busy. So please do your best to follow along, pay attention, interact, but no question is a bad question. So please feel free to throw out your questions here. We're here to help you. I'm going to be in the chat the entire night and we'll all be taking turns taking questions. Next thing I want to do is if anybody here is interested in upcoming events, I'm going to go ahead and throw this link here in the chat. This link will take you to our events page. So if you enjoyed the event tonight, or if you're interested in checking out other events, the school's constantly doing different events, whether it's learning about how to be an online student, different programs, you name it, just check out that link and it'll take you right where you need to be so you can see all the different events we have for the month of May. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and get us started here. I'll be your host tonight and you'll see me in the chat, but I want to go ahead and introduce the star of the show here first, who is our director of the School of Landscape Architecture. So a little bit about Heather. Heather is a licensed landscape architect whose selected projects include the Advanced Concept Center for General Motors in Malibu, California, Columbia University's Athletic Training Center in New York, Carousel Park Playground at the Santa Monica Pier in Santa Monica, California, the master plan for Claremont's Harvey Mudd College in California, the General Motors corporate headquarters in Thousand Oaks, California, and Berkeley Hillel in Berkeley, California. As well as several design competition awards. She has an MLA from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Heather. I'll be in the chat as your host, and Eric will be coming on here soon as well. Thank you all. See you in the chat.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Hector. And I want to just say hi to everybody. I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. So can everybody see that? Which is the most asked question.
Yep, we see it.
Okay, excellent, excellent. That and whether you've gotten your second vaccine, right? I mean, those are the daily questions. So everybody, this is really great to be here. And so I want to say hi to all of you out there in webinar land. And thanks for joining us this evening. And while you're getting settled, go ahead and grab a pencil or a pen and a couple of pieces of paper, anything that you can draw on, because after this talk that I'm going to give, which is going to be about a half hour, maybe 35 minutes or so, there is going to be a drawing demonstration with our other co-host, Eric Arneson, who I will introduce at the end of the presentation. Okay. So we're here, as Hector mentioned, to talk about the art and the science of trees. And I am here as a landscape architect because of trees. It's a long story, but the short version is that one week there was a forest that was a great destination for us, and 2 weeks later, it was gone. And that experience, that single experience, made me realize that I needed to understand the larger picture of plants, how decisions were made, and instead of the microscopic view that I was learning as a botany student at Berkeley. So I want to talk about trees. They got me into landscape architecture, and it would be wonderful just to look at pictures of them all night. But there are a lot of stories that trees have to tell. And this one is really a great story because you're looking at one tree. This is a clone of aspen in Utah, and it is known as, oh gosh, it just, Pando is what it is Latin for I spread. And it is a clone of 47,000 trees that are all genetically exactly the same. And guess what? It is the largest living organism on planet Earth. So move over blue whale. This thing weighs 6,500 tons. And scientists estimate that it's over close to 80,000 years old. So what's interesting about these aspen, the Populus tremuloides, is that they exist in clones all over the Northern Hemisphere, but none is as large as this one in Utah. So if you ever have a chance, go and visit it. Trees in general are spectacular creatures. They come in all shapes and sizes and colors and sculptural forms and bark textures and branch patterns. And they give us a sense of where we are in the world. They give us a sense of their location and why. because their very forms are a pure expression of where they exist in the world and all of the forces that they have to contend with in the world. And then there are trees like this, the Sequoia giganteum, the giant sequoias of California, that are magnificent in terms of not only their structure and their scale, notice the person down on the ground, but the fact that they can transport water from their very fibrous root systems up through the trunk via the vascular systems, and they can, over their lifetime, transport hundreds of thousands of gallons of water through the process of photosynthesis. So these trees are machines. They are living machines, and if you ever tried to build one, you would be challenged. If you ever tried to design one, you would be challenged. They are true working, living machines. In the desert, the plants, the trees, such as the Joshua tree, the color of their leaves, the form of their, again, their structure, and even their location in the desert are all about survival. They place themselves at very specific locations in the desert so that they're not competing with one another. And it's all about, again, basic survival. And when you're talking about survival and trees, the bristlecone pine has to come to mind. These trees, again, are one of the oldest living non-clonal trees on Earth. And they are 5,000 to 8,000 years old. So that takes us back into the medieval ages, basically, just the beginning of the Renaissance. Quite spectacular. And their forms are very twisted and really quite beautiful, but it's all a matter of them surviving in a very, very tough climate. You can see that they're basically growing out of these granite slabs with very little water, high wind, high altitude, and yet they survive. So they are, you know, they're symbols. Trees are very symbolic, and we'll talk about this later. Now this tree, on the other hand, has lived really the life of Riley, quite a luxurious life compared to the bristlecone pine along the coast of Santa Barbara. And it is quite an icon in this community, and a much loved one and much protected tree as well. It's a ficus. I think it's a macrocarpa. Eric can correct me later, but it's a beauty, and it's a must see when you're in the area. As is this, if you're ever in Seattle, right about now, though it's probably over, that the cherries blossom every year. And that's another thing about trees, is that they have a regular pattern. These living machines know when to respond to the sun and the number of hours of light during the various seasons. And they put on these spectacular shows that become destinations in and of themselves, as do the ginkgos in Beijing in the fall. And of course, trees in their various forms, in their various locations, offer habitat to all kinds of various wildlife. So trees are incredibly diverse and beautiful, and they also provide landscape architects and landscape designers with one of our primary means of design, one of our primary materials of design. We're very privileged to be able to work with these living, breathing, ephemeral elements of nature. And, you know, whether it's the texture of the trunk or the color of the trunk, trees are used to create space, to create edges, to create focal points, and are used widely. And the trees that you've seen here are just the tip of the iceberg. Okay, the plant community and the plant world is incredibly diverse, and as are trees, the tree world as well. So along with this incredible range of form and sculpture and texture and color and leaf shape and seasonal change, trees are also central to our survival. And we'll get to that in a minute. But I'd like to bring up the point that using plants to create space, to express a place, to create a destination is what makes our profession of landscape architecture set apart. Okay, we are different from architecture and interior architecture and all other environmental design, that we are able to use plants and particularly trees in our designs to create outdoor space. And I love to tell my students that architecture is the design of buildings, obvious. Interior design is the design of those buildings, the interior design of those buildings. And landscape architecture is everything else. It's the space between buildings. It's the space between cities. And as James Corner, who collaborated on New York City's High Line, said, landscape architecture is everything under the sun. And so if there was ever a time to study landscape architecture, it's now in 2021, because we are facing some issues that we have never faced before. And although landscape architecture can't solve climate change on its own or global warming on its own, of course, thoughtful planning and design, we can help cities reduce their impact on global warming. Okay, and why cities? Well, because that's where most people live. That's where most materials are consumed. That's where most waste is generated and the most pollution is created. In just less than 30 years, in the year 2050, the United Nations estimates say that 2 out of every 3 people in the world will be living in cities. And that's up from just 50% 3 years ago. And I don't know if you know this, but here in the US, over 83% of us live in cities. Okay, so it's a crowded place. And when you consider the impacts of sea level rise, where most people live along coasts, there is, movement inland, and the densification gets more, it increases, and you have denser and denser cities. And so what that means is that there's more pollution generated, there is more CO2 emitted into the atmosphere, and it's contributing more and more and more to global warming. So if there was ever a time to plant more trees, this is it. Because along with oceans, trees are one of the main carbon dioxide capture mechanisms on the planet. And that's because of photosynthesis, which is the process of absorbing sunlight and carbon dioxide and water and transforming it through a photochemical process to produce the sugars and carbohydrates that's the food for the plant and oxygen for us to breathe. So it's a double whammy. Plants give us that double whammy. Not only do they capture the CO2, but they provide oxygen for us to breathe, for us and animals and all living things to breathe. So a white oak such as this is a Quercus alba. It's often called the king tree, as you can see. It's a big, beautiful specimen. And these trees can live for up to 200 years and sometimes longer. And so consider that for over 2 centuries, this tree has been absorbing CO2 and producing oxygen. And that's just a single tree. And if you take a tree that lives for 100 years, for example, which most of the trees that we've seen so far do, they live to be 100 years old. These trees can sequester or capture over 20,000 pounds of carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. in that time, in that 100 years. And they can create close to 15,000 pounds of oxygen, which is equivalent to a 20-year supply of oxygen for a single person. And on top of that, every year, a tree for its 100-year life can produce, or actually, sorry, capture particles from the air, such as soot and dust and other pollutants, and actually take it out of the air as well. So that's just one tree. You know, those are just single, that data is just for a single tree. So when you think about an entire forest, the effect, the total effect is amazing. And in fact, the US Forest Service, which by the way is one of the largest employers of landscape architects, has done studies and has estimated that the forests of the North American continent take up about 16% of the carbon dioxide emissions that are created on average. And of course, it changes every year, but that's also significant. So, you know, the next time you go to a national park, think about that, because not only are these remnants of our once wild frontier, not only are they recreation zones, but they are huge carbon sinks, and they are doing a lot of work for us. So not only are cities crowded, and increasingly so, but cities are covered with impervious surfaces, roads, pavements, buildings, and parking lots. And the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, did a study, and they discovered this really appalling fact that 2% of the land surface on the North American continent is covered by parking lots. 2%. In Sacramento, the capital city of California, the 45% of the total area of that city is covered by impervious surfaces. That is, surfaces where the water cannot percolate down into the soil. 45%, that's almost half of the city area, covered by impermeable or impervious surfaces. And in Salt Lake City, it's 36%. So here's a challenge for each of you. Do some research and see how much of your town or your city is covered by impermeable or impervious surfaces. I bet you'll be surprised. And not happily so. Here's Hilltop Mall in Richmond, California. They literally shaved off the top of a hilltop to create a mall. And I just show it because it's a reminder that even if there's soil in these developed areas, that soil is probably compacted so hard that it's impermeable as well. So that we could just say, you know, most of our urban areas are 100% impermeable, okay? So when rain hits these surfaces, they don't, like I say, they don't transfer down into the soil like they should in order to recharge the aquifers that exist below the surface of the soil. Excuse me. What they do is they run off the surface. Excuse me for 1 second. Sorry about that. So what happens when the rain hits the surface, it rushes off. It moves very, very quickly. And it picks up all the bacteria, all the pollutants, all the gas and oil that's on that pavement and dumps it into the drain inlet and takes it into the storm sewer system, which ultimately ends up in our water system. So when we have these extreme weather events, which apparently are from global warming, and you have more water hitting these impermeable surfaces, you've got a real problem on your hands, okay? Because you've got a lot of water and it's moving really fast. There's nothing to stop it. Let's see. Okay. In the natural world, trees come to the rescue. Of course they do. The canopy, or the top of the tree, captures and intercepts the water. The leaves intercept the water before it hits the ground. And sometimes the water doesn't even get to hit the ground because of the dispersal of that water on the leaves. But oftentimes, of course, it does, but it slows the rainfall down and also directs it along the branches and down the rivulets of the trunk to the ground, where the water can actually percolate into the soil as it should and recharge the water supply. Now, parking lots are a real issue. I mean, the fact that they cover up 2% of our entire continent is really ridiculous, and something needs to be done about it, and something is being done about it. And we have many landscape architects and city planners and local municipalities are employing strategies of green infrastructure. And that is an entire subject in and of itself. And in fact, we teach an entire couple of courses on green infrastructure strategies. But suffice it to say that in this little parking lot, you have newly planted trees, and you have what was probably a concrete center median that has been divided up into planted areas. The trees will eventually cast some shade, and these areas will allow water to percolate into the soil. There are also new materials coming out, such as permeable asphalt, permeable concrete, and all kinds of new developments that really allow water to do what it's supposed to do. And when it falls from the sky, it needs to percolate into the ground. Here's a project by Martha Schwartz, landscape architect, that is really a multi-use zone. It's essentially a parking lot, but it is using the same green infrastructure strategies of permeable pavement, lots of green areas where the water can hit and percolate the soil, and a tree. At least there's one tree there, but there are probably more in the larger area. And then this parking lot has gotten a lot of notoriety because it actually won an ASLA, an American Society of Landscape Architects Award. And it was the first and so far only parking lot to do so. You can see that there is a row of trees that form the perimeter of these areas, these green areas. All of the parking lot itself are all slanted, are all graded so that the water sheets off into these low-lying areas. And the roots of the trees actually help filter all of the pollutants that are washed off from the asphalt before it goes into these detention ponds, and those will fill up in a heavy rainstorm, settle down into the land, and then any other runoff goes to a local creek. So there are lots of strategies out there. Trees are regarded, most and recently so, which is interesting, are regarded as a key element in green infrastructure because of their ability to absorb water, to filter pollutants in the soil, and of course, because of their ability to sequester and capture carbon dioxide. Now, one of the other main results of impermeable surfaces in the city is something that you probably are all familiar with, and that is the urban heat island effect. That is that the center of the city can become very, very hot because of all of the surfaces that absorb the heat and then re-radiate it out continually day by day and during the night. And so you have temperatures that can be anywhere from 10 to 15 and sometimes even 20 degrees higher in the urban center than in the surrounding areas where there's more vegetation. So the urban heat island is an important thing to know about because it kills more people and animals than any other storm emergency. And so it is a real issue, again, with global warming. And it also brings up the very important point that throughout the world, low-income neighborhoods are often the hottest because they are often the densest, and they are often the ones that don't have green spaces or trees in that area. And so it means that these communities are more prone to be affected by severe heat. So what's the solution, class? Plant more trees, right? Plant more trees, because trees literally cool the air. Trees physically provide shade. That's just a given, right? But they also, when I described, the idea of the water going up the trunks of those gigantic sequoia trees, the same process happens in all trees. And that evapotranspiration of bringing the water from the roots up the trunk, out the branches to the leaves, actually puts moisture in the air and cools it. On the left, you see Paley Park in downtown Manhattan. It was built many years ago and still is, again, an icon and a destination. And it is an oasis. It truly is an oasis in a very, very dense city. But street trees provide shade, quiet, bird song, and just a different sense than a street without trees.
Hey, Heather.
Yeah.
We had a quick question in the chat. Said,
Sure.
Can one join ASLA if they are already a member of the AIA Society?
Well, that is a very excellent question, and thank you for it. Yes, one can, and if one is a student, you can join for free, and because they're trying to increase their enrollment, so to speak. And so go to www.asla.org. That's ASLA.org. And if you are a student, you can join for free, but membership with the ASLA is great because if you ever wanted to know anything about landscape architecture, it's the place to go. It's got a very, very rich, multi-layered website, and they have just some great information. So thank you for that question. So another challenge for each of you is to look around your city, look around your town, and see if there are any empty lots that could use a little uplifting. And maybe get some pals together and start planting trees, because we'll see some examples later. But empty lots, of which there are even in the densest of cities, are seeing a resurgence, a lot of it due to COVID, of community gardens and just a general greening in order to bring life into the city and bring food into the city, not to mention all of the things that individual trees bring. So, and again, that is an entirely different subject and a different class. Trees also have the ability to, as I mentioned before, take dust particles out of the air, and are particularly great when they're on a street, because if you live on a street that has dense canopied trees, those trees can actually remove some of the traffic noise and replace it with the sound of the wind moving through the trees, as well as any wildlife that lives in the trees. So it is a multi-dimensional. Now, if you don't have an empty lot and you have a building and you don't have any room in the city, you can go vertical. And this is actually known as the vertical forest, designed by an Italian architect by the name of Stefan Boeri. And this place is quite amazing. It's 2 towers. You only see one here, but it contains, each building contains 20,000 trees and shrubs, and it absorbs 30 tons of carbon dioxide a year and emits 19 tons of oxygen a year. So the idea of creating vertical forests is something that is catching on. And in fact, he has been asked to design similar buildings in cities all around the world, and is working on a forested city in China that's supposed to open up in the next couple of months. So the simple fact that we need is that we need more trees in our cities around the world. But the reality is that we're losing trees on Earth at an alarming rate. And I'm sure this is not news to you either. Whether it's burning or just deforestation, we're losing trees that way. In the United States alone, we lose 56 million trees a year, primarily to development. And what does development mean? It means impermeable surfaces for the most part. It means sidewalks, roads, highways, buildings, and parking lots. Okay. And so if the pandemic has taught us, well, it's taught us a lot, hasn't it? And one of the things that it's taught us is that outdoor public spaces have become a lifeline for people. And it's also taught us that millions of people around the world don't have green spaces or open public spaces to go to. And I'm going to make another pitch for landscape architecture, because landscape architecture is all about envisioning a healthier, more flexible, more equitable public outdoor space. Our very, what do I want to say? Our very purpose is public health, safety, and welfare. That's why we're a licensed profession, just like architects are a licensed profession and engineers are a licensed profession. They also uphold public health, safety, and welfare. It's what we do. And again, our focus is everything else, that outdoor realm. And so the idea of making green spaces and healthy places and sustainable places for everyone is one of our goals. And when I use the word sustainable, I mean not just ecologically, but economically and socially, because they all work together. They really are everything else. And again, I will say very loud and clear is that landscape architecture is not the end all and be all, right? I mean, we are part of the larger picture. And the United Nations has done an incredible job of putting global warming and climate change into the public's mainstream mind. So you have organizations at the global scale, and the meetings, the environmental conferences that they have held over the years have brought more world leaders together than ever before. And the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is an outgrowth of the United Nations, and they have a habitat component which is completely focused on the urban situation. So there are lots of ways to get involved, lots of ways to make your voice heard and really take action. And then on the other scale, you have community groups, community active groups, such as Friends of the Urban Forest, which are located here in San Francisco. And they work with communities to plant street trees. And so far, since their founding in 1981, they've planted over 60,000 trees. And yet that's only halfway. Of all of the available streets in San Francisco, they've gotten halfway, and their goal is to plant street trees across the entire city. So, you know, we work, we volunteer, we do whatever we can. And now, in the last couple of minutes, I'd like to introduce you to a couple of projects where trees have been a key design element. These two projects are by Peter Walker, who is a preeminent landscape architect over in Berkeley. And he is in his early 90s, and he still goes in every day, and he is still a leader and thinker in the field. This, you might recognize, is the 9/11 memorial that he worked with Michael Arid, the architect, on. The two squares, of course, represent the fountains and are the footprints, the actual footprints of where the World Trade Towers stood. But the other element that you see very clearly there, those circles, are trees. There are over 400 of them, and they play a key role in this very, very amazing and emotive design, which I'm sure many of you have been to. The trees play a key role, and in fact, they are called sacred space. The overall concept for this design is, reflecting absence. And some of the sub-concepts included the planting of the trees, and the trees were known as sacred space. And he chose swamp oaks because of their form, their structure, their branching structure, which actually mimicked the arches of the Yamasaki Towers, the World Trade Towers, that had that very unique shape at the base of the towers. So very thoughtful, not arbitrary choice. And the other reason that these trees were chosen was because they have very distinct, they present very distinctly in all four seasons, particularly in the spring, where they have a beautiful display of flowers. So there is also one other tree that, again, if you've been there, you have probably met it. It is called the survivor tree, and it's located right there. It blooms first before all of the other swamp oaks do. And it was the only living thing that was taken from the rubble of the buildings and was taken up to the New York City Parks and Rec Botanical Garden and nurtured for 10 years before it was brought back and put in its original location. And so you talk about symbolism in a tree. It is much loved and again, taken very, very careful care of. But then so are all of the other trees. This entire park, this entire memorial is on structure. That is, it's lifted up above the ground. It floats above all of the transit below. And so it's a rooftop garden, essentially. And so Peter Walker and his team, and particularly Adam Greenspan, one of his premier designers, came up with some incredibly technologically innovative solutions to maintain and to ensure that these trees lived a good long life and did what they needed to do which was on the one hand provide serenity and shade, excuse me, and a coolness, that sense of sacredness, but also do their job as carbon captures as well, right? So it's a very sophisticated system in terms of both the soil and the water that's given to these trees. All of the trees were hand selected and put in a nursery in New Jersey in order to acclimate for a couple of years, and then they were brought in very carefully as the project proceeded. And it's resulted in what really is an urban oasis. There are many aspects of green infrastructure at play here. All of the pavement is permeable. It is hand set into sand so that if any repairs are needed, it can be lifted out without, jackhammering or anything. There is plenty of green to allow water to percolate. And again, it provides a place that is fitting for such a memorial. So that comes out of PWP's office, Peter Walker Partners, again, in Berkeley. And here is another project that you might have also been to, if you've been to San Francisco more or less recently when things have begun to open up. This is the Transbay Terminal, the new Transbay terminal. And it is a series of 5 levels. And you can see that it is, again, this technological marvel that has been done in collaboration with engineers, structural engineers, and so on and so forth. But you've got layers of transit, of commercial, of a congregation, of the bus lanes up here, and then floating up above, again, way above ground, you have what is an incredible public space. And in fact, Peter Walker conceived this as a community garden for this area of San Francisco. And it is literally floating on clouds that were designed by Caesar Pelli, is the architect. And you can see this row of the trees up here. And it's not just a park. It's actually an educational experience, because as you walk around this, what is it? It's about 5 acres in size, and it's got a big loop track around the perimeter. You've got some very amazing and clever plantings that teach you about biomes and about microclimates, and it is quite an experience. Here is an illustration, a digital illustration that reminds us that not only are these plants for the enjoyment of people, this is actually connected to corridors, pollinator corridors that exist throughout San Francisco that have been marked and noted. And so there are, again, nonprofit groups, educational groups that have marked all of this information so that any new development can hook into that and create and expand these corridors for wildlife and, again, other pollinators such as insects and birds. Here's a digital rendering of the Transbay Terminal space. And this is just a reminder that communicating ideas is essential. You can have all of the greatest ideas that you want, but if you can't communicate them, then they just exist in your head. And here at the School of Landscape Architecture, we teach digital drawing. We have several classes, but you start out with hand drawing. And in order to do great digital drafting, you really need to learn the basics of hand drawing and understand line weight and tonal value and all of those principles so that you can apply them to digital rendering and create renderings that really give your client and really yourself a sense of what a space can be. So I want you to get out those pencils, get out your paper, and get ready to draw with Eric. It's my very great pleasure to introduce you to one of my former students. Eric Arneson graduated in 2016 with a BFA in landscape architecture. And in 2016, he also won an ASLA, an American Society of Landscape Architecture Student Award for his project of Bendway Park, which I'll show you in a minute. But he and his partner, who was also a graduate of our program, founded Topophyla, which is a landscape design firm, right after school. They're based in Santa Barbara, and you guys are going to have a great time with him. This is his project, his award-winning project, and it was just the first of many awards that Eric has won. So it's my pleasure to pass this torch over to Eric, and thank you very much for your attention and for being here. And if you have any questions about the School of Landscape Architecture, there's my email, and I welcome any questions. And thanks again.
All right. Thank you so much, Heather. That was a wonderful presentation. So I really love this presentation that its title is The Art and Science of Trees, because what I really think when it comes down to it, the simplest definition of landscape architecture is essentially the combination of art and science. We are artists as well as scientists. We think creatively, we solve problems by using our understanding of science and the physical world to create spaces, to educate people, and to further benefit the society and the people that use these spaces. And one of the ways that we do this is by demonstrating graphically. And one of the tools that we use in our designs are, of course, trees, as Heather has clearly shown. Trees are an incredible tool that we take advantage of. These things they're living things. They've evolved over millions of years to form different shapes and adapt to different ecosystems. And it's our job as designers to utilize them in a way that benefits our design, benefits the trees, and benefits ourselves in the future. So one way we do that is by learning how to draw trees. So the best way to understand a tree, in my opinion, is to analyze what they look like and their form. So how you do that typically is you'll look at a tree like this, Arbutus marina strawberry tree here. You want to look at its form and get the major outline. And by drawing that, you can clearly understand what this tree, how it's shaped, how it can be used in a design. And the best way that we do that as landscape architects is by graphically showing them in plan and elevation. So we have our little tree here, and an elevation is a side view. So we have our little person looking at a tree. It's typically how we look at it from the side, and that's going to be our elevation view. Whereas a plan view is simply from pretty much what the birds will see and up in the clouds. So that's a plan looking straight down in elevation. So what I'm going to be going through right now is how to draw several different types of trees in this method. So plan and elevation of each one. And we have a broadleaf evergreen, which is a strawberry tree. We have a multi-branching deciduous tree, which is this Japanese maple. And we have a conifer, which is this coastal redwood. Then we have a palm, which is the Mexican fan palm. So the first one we'll go to is the broadleaf evergreen strawberry tree. And this tree, this is probably the most typical tree symbol that we use, which is just a the simplest sense, pretty simple circle with not much styling. Then the tree is your typical tree that you'd probably draw as a child with a single stem and kind of like a lollipop shape. So what I like to do when I'm drawing trees is I take a very hard density pencil to sketch out things. After a while, you learn these by memory, but for this demonstration, I think it's helpful to show. So you want to sketch out the basic form of the tree. So you see it has a single stem, it's a standard tree, and then it has pretty much a lollipop shaped crown. And then for the plan view, you want to take, whenever you're drawing plan view trees, you always want to utilize a circle template, unless you're drawing something very unique. But typically we use the circle template, and that makes sure that you have a nice, clean, round shape that's not ugly. So, and then I go back with my felt tip pen. This is a fine point pentel stylus. These are very great for sketching. So you're going to come back and get these details. So you don't want to be too fussy with drawing the tree. You really want to be kind of loose, and you want to see what these leaves look like. So if you look at a strawberry tree, their leaves are kind of oval with a point at the end. So you want to give some of that character in this tree, and you want to give it a regularity. So you want it to look like it's not a perfectly symmetric tree. So then add some texture in the leaves here. And then for the plan view, you want to pretty much add the same texture to that symbol. So while you're drawing trees, you start to analyze things that give it its character, such as the texture of the trunk, the leaf texture. And by capturing its like pure essence in these little sketches, you start to understand how you can use them in a design in the future. So one thing I also like to do with these trees is to add some color. It adds a little pop and makes it more graphically legible. And with this, I'm using chart pack markers, and I'm going to take a very light color and shade in this side that I'm imagining would be exposed to the sunlight. So the top left here, or top left, kind of similar to this photo. And just fill in the whole tree itself. And I can do the plan view down here as well. So what I'm filling in the lightest tone of the tree first, which will allow us to then go into the shadow side of this tree and add in the darkest tone. Add some texture and do the same with this. So with the plan view, you want to imagine like you're rendering or drawing a sphere, because essentially what a tree canopy is a sphere in the simplest sense. And what that does is makes a very 3D element that when you're rendering it on your plan, it'll pop off the page, which is what you want your trees to do. So they're not flat and reading as hardscape or something like that. So here I'm just adding some texture, kind of hinting at the personality of the strawberry tree, and doing the same on the plan. And the plan, I like to go back with another pass of the lightest tone to kind of blend this stuff in and add texture there. So one thing you can also do to add some more depth to this tree is come back with a shadow. So what you want to do is you want to take the same circle template, offset it on the shadow edge here. You can trace this out or do it freehand. Just trace it for this one. And you can use a darker, like a purple marker here, but for this, I'm just going to be hatching in a quick shadow. What that does is really pop this off the page and helps it read as a three-dimensional object. And also when you're sketching trees, it's it's always nice to add some scale in there like a person. So a quick little sketch. So you can see that the tree, like a tree like this, is a really nice street tree because the clearance of the crown canopy is at about eye level here. So it's a really nice tree. It's one of my favorite trees in San Francisco, especially for a street tree. Then add in the red bark, and there we have our broadleaf evergreen. So next tree will be one of the most famous trees in the world, mostly used, is a Japanese maple. And that's for good reason, because these trees are highly versatile. Humans have bred them into, it's like the dog species. It's like the dog of trees. There's so many different varieties and thousands of different shapes and colors. Highly domesticated, but my favorite form is the natural green multi-branching Acer palmatum Japanese maple. So this one, you want to get that multi-branching character in there. This is just highly distinctive of this tree, and essentially what this tree's branching is doing is it's fractioning itself into smaller and smaller branches. So it's little fingers that are breaking off into points. So you want to start off with a large trunk at the base, give it some gnarly character. This is one of those cool trees that there's never two that look identical. So you want to, I know you probably can't see this, that's the that's the intent with these hard pencils, but you want to keep fractaling off these branches into smaller and smaller pieces. Give it some character on the trunk, and then go for the canopy. And this is more of an oval shape for these large multi-branching trees. And then, of course, do the same with the plan view. And where the broadleaf evergreen was kind of a boring, basic circle, this one you get to have some fun with, and I'll show you in a sec. So start with your baseline to ground the tree there, and then start adding in the trunk here. So showing a bit more character, invoking the personality of the tree. And there's a reason why we've created so many varieties of this tree in the nursery trade, is because it's really gorgeous. It's highly versatile. You can bonsai these things. You can have them grow to 40 feet tall and really create a beautiful landscape and create a grove of these. So, and this is just typical multi-branching specimen. So add some texture to the trunk, and then come into with adding the leaf texture. So here you can see it kind of has these chunks of leaves, and you really want to invoke that in this. So it kind of breaks up the canopy. There's some holes and gaps where the light comes in. And these leaves they're kind of pointy. It's so this is a good example of it. So they're kind of star-shaped leaves. So that's what a typical leaf looks like. Got the veins. You want to show that character in this canopy. So little points here and there, jagged. You don't want it to be kind of lumpy. You want it to have that character of a Japanese maple. And then add that texture a little bit on the inside. Will help make it read more three-dimensional. Especially you want to kind of render it like an orb itself. So you want to add some texture along this bottom perimeter where the light's gonna be shining this way. So you want to add that texture down here in the shadow side. So this is a fun part for me. I really like this tree symbol. So you want to show a multi-branching or a deciduous symbol. You want to really characterize the branching structure. So this is where I'm going to really emphasize the fractaling branches, where they get smaller and smaller. So now I'm just drawing several large branches. Then you're going to take, from each one of these branches, you're going to take a smaller branch and a smaller branch and smaller. breaking that up into smaller little twigs and branches. And then add some thickness in the stem here. And of course, do the outline. So then bring that texture in and bring some.
Hey, Eric, we got a quick ask. Could you scoot the drawing up just a little bit on the
Oh,
camera?
yes, yeah, thank you.
All right. No problem.
Perfect. Yeah, now you can see all that. So there we got that tree. Gonna add my little scale figure here. Enjoying the shade, that beautiful Japanese maple. I'm gonna add some color. Same strategy as the last tree. Gonna fill in with the light tone. Coming with the dark tone on the shady side. Some texture. This is kind of one of those things that, especially at the Academy of Art, where they have a strong emphasis on hand drawing, which is awesome, that you learn to draw like billions of these. I think I've probably drawn about a billion in my lifetime so far. And it's kind of therapeutic after amount of time. I don't know if it's the fumes from the pen or it's just that it's so nice and it reminds, it's kind of nostalgic, brings me back to my school days. But it's kind of nice when you're on a stressful day and you get to actually do this. You get an excuse to do something therapeutic and relaxing. So that's one of the great things about being a landscape architect. So consider it. Then come back and mix this. And then one of the biggest taboos when drawing a tree that I've seen is that people always think of the wood of a tree as brown. So when you look at a tree, it's more of a gray neutral tone. So you never want to draw your trees as a brown looking trunk, unless it's an Arbutus marina, which is kind of red. So that might break the rule. Typically, it's going to be a gray color. So there's our Japanese maple, our deciduous multi-branching tree. And then the next typical tree symbol that we work with a lot as landscape architects, especially the more high elevation areas where there's a lot of conifers, is of course the conifer, which in this example, it's a Sequoia sempervirens coastal redwood, which is one of the greatest trees to ever have existed, since it's the tallest that we have recorded. Which some might argue that there's a species of eucalyptus in Australia that may have been the tallest, but they were logged out of existence, so we don't know. So with this one, it's pretty much like a Christmas tree. You have pretty much a triangle shape. It's as simple as that. It's just a matter of adding in texture. So some conifers, they are more of a leafing form, whereas this redwood, this young redwood, which is probably about like 10 years old and about 40 feet tall, but it has more of the leaves are facing upwards. So you want to capture that characteristic in this tree. And of course, we got our plan view tree symbol. So with this, we're going to just bring in some texture. So get those leaves that are kind of pointing upwards, the texture is going up. And add some character like the winds blowing in on the tips there. And like I said earlier, irregularity is pretty key when drawing trees, because it's not very common unless things have been topiaried or controlled, or it's a very specific species that things grow in symmetry and perfection. So add some texture, it's always fun. And then conifers are really easy. These typically we show these as a series of scalloped weeping or scallop use shape symbols that just give it texture, like you're showing the needles on the leaves. So you want these to be kind of irregular and undulating, different sizes. And there's your conifer symbol. And then it's always fun to show the scale of these guys because these things are huge. So there's your little guy. The same thing, let's go with the different color set here. So I'm going to start with the lightest color. Fill in our shape here. And fill in the dark shade. Come back and just blend that. The texture of conifers is irregular, so just stipple here and there. There we have our conifer coastal redwood. One of my favorite types of trees of all is the palm tree. It's essentially is what got me into landscape architecture. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with the tropics and being warm and tropical and in a nice place like that. And tried to grow palm trees by myself from seed and things like that. And that's what got me into horticulture and botany. And that's what ultimately led me to landscape architecture. So this species of palm is a Mexican fan palm, Washingtonia robusta. This is native to northern Mexico. And palms are a really interesting plant because they're not actually defined as trees. They're more like a giant grass or a woody perennial, which they have a growth point, which will start at the ground and then will create a woody material below it that will elevate the canopy. So there's only one growing point that's truly alive, which is the top here that is growing. The rest of the tree is just a vehicle for transporting water upwards. So when you're drawing palm trees, you kind of have to work with two types of palms. There's the fan palm and then the feather palms, which in this example, it's a fan palm. The leaf is shaped like a fan. So basically want to create a stem circle here for the canopy and then your plant symbol down here. So this one I'm going to go a little more creative and show a cluster of palms, because typically how you see these palms is that they plant one and then they reseed themselves. They're kind of weedy, so they'll create little babies around the bottom. So we're going to show that. And the symbol.
Hey, Eric.
Yeah.
Quick question about the drawing from our Pita. She asked, he or she asked, is there any particular reason why the hard lines for the trunks start from the bottom and go up?
All right. So if we're looking at this tree here, what are we talking about? The hard lines? This base here?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it has to do with maybe your drawing style, but that was the question. Is there any particular reason why the hard lines for the trunks start from the bottom and go up? Maybe if you don't mind, could you maybe clarify the question in the chat for us a little bit too?
Well, I think my simplest answer was because I draw trees like how they grow. I don't know. They grow from the base. And they may be referring to the solid line I draw here which is basically a graphic technique to ground the tree. If you just drew it here, it looked like it was floating, because when you see a tree, you always see it in the ground, so it's something that kind of grounds it. That just might be a graphic thing. So I'll go back to the palm here. So I'm gonna show the texture of the trunk. Don't want to be too literal, but don't want to be too smooth. And then you want to add that leaf texture. You don't want to go in and draw every single leaf. It's nearly impossible unless you got a lot of time on your hands. And just show that trunk going down. And here we got the little babies popping up around the base. These are things that you'll see lining Los Angeles skyline, almost like it is a weed. So a very typical California landscape. You'll see these everywhere. And a fact to be known is that there's only one species of palm that's native to California, the cousin of this one, the Washingtonia foliifera, which you'll find out in Palm Springs, which is why they call it Palm Springs. So this one, you get kind of funky with the symbol. With the palms, you don't want to show a lot of texture on the inside. They end up kind of messy.
Hey, Eric, what's the brand of marker that you're using?
Chart Pack ad markers, which are the more common one used by architects and illustrators is probably Copic, which is an alcohol base. These are xylene based, which I think might be outlawed. So it's hard to get your hands on them sometimes. They're considered slightly toxic, but I'm in a well ventilated room. And the reason for the xylene based markers is they just blend so much better. And it's, for some reason, landscape architects have really taken a liking to them, because everyone I know uses these. Just that trunk color. And these typically have a skirt of dried leaves at the base, so add some yellow or brown at the bottom there. There we got our palm symbol. So I guess I'll leave you with that and show you all the flat layout here. So as I said, this one of the tools that we use as landscape architects is trees, and of course we need to be able to draw them if we're showing them. And one of my favorite memes really shares how I feel as a landscape architect or a landscape designer, is that I love my job. I'm always having, I wake up happy every day that I get to do what I do. And essentially what that means is I feel like a child at heart every day. Is that, and this meme really puts it in perspective, really kind of solidifies how I feel, is that landscape architects, that one thing we share in common with children especially is that we get to draw trees all the time. And children, that's many people, probably the last time they drew a tree was when they were a child. So that's something that I get to enjoy and privileged to have. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that.
That was great. Thank you. So, you know, I'll go ahead and see if I can maybe pass this back to Heather here, or either one of you two. There was some questions in the chat and I tried to take them down as they were coming through. I had a question out there earlier from Samuel. It was, the urbanist anti-carb movement has gathered momentum in recent years. Given that trees take up a lot of space, which is at a premium in cities, do you think it will be necessary to reclaim some of that space from car infrastructure?
Eric, do you want to go with that?
I'll take a pass at that.
Yeah.
Pretty strong feelings.
Uh-huh.
I think absolutely. I think as people, especially during COVID, I think people will reevaluate how they interact with the environment and how we commute, how we live our lives. I think a lot of us have realized that we can work from home, do essentially the same thing, and not have to commute 2 hours in the day. So that's going to take millions of cars off the roads throughout this country, especially, which we're driven by cars. I think another factor that's going to be huge is autonomy, especially in vehicles and in cities. I think fleets of things like robo-taxis will be transporting people. People won't own cars anymore. So that's going to really change how we design cities to be more friendly to things like that. So it's going to leave a lot more room for taking back streets and creating them into parks. And one of my favorite places in San Francisco was off of Union Square, where they were doing construction for the BART tunnel underneath, and they just paved over the street with AstroTurf. It was nothing special, but you got to experience what it's like to be on a street, walking around freely, and just enjoying and experiencing the city in that perspective, which is just mind-blowing compared to what you're used to being on the 4-foot sidewalk, almost being murdered by a bunch of ton vehicles going 40 miles per hour. So that's my thought there.
Yeah, and in places, that are really, really dense and there isn't room for trees, there are all of these infrastructure strategies, again, of planting green walls, green roofs, and getting the same or close to the same benefits that a tree or a grove of trees would give you. So there's lots of alternatives if there isn't actually room for trees. There's always walls and rooftops.
There was a question out there that said, what are the rules of transporting trees across different continents to help a neighborhood, city, or country? So, are there rules around maybe just what type of plants and perhaps zoning?
Well, there is a huge issue in the nursery trade of invasive species being brought across different continents. The citrus industry is especially impacted in California.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of invasive species that have just decimated local crops. And that's the same in the nursery trade. So a lot of plants will just be destroyed. There's a plant, Myoporum, which was heavily used in coastal areas in California, which has pretty much been just destroyed by thrips that were brought in from invasive areas. So it's a huge issue that needs to be regulated and monitored.
Mm-hmm.
So this was from Jason. Could someone detail the economic benefits? It says in dollar amounts, that might be pretty hard, of trees and green space when added to undeserved communities. So I don't know exactly how to take that one in dollar amounts, but basically some of the economic benefits.
Well, in general, when you create places that people like to go to, that engenders, more, for instance, if you have a store, for example, and actually there are a lot of economic analyses that have been done of projects. I'm thinking of a project that, oh gosh, well, in general, if you make a place that's more beautiful, that people want to go to, then you have commercial enterprises, whether they're bodegas or restaurants, see an increase in traffic. People want to be there. Property values go up. And it also has a negative effect of gentrification, right? So this is where, being able to, and gentrification meaning that the property values go up so high that the people that originally lived there can't afford to live there anymore and have to move. This is happening all over the United States, and in San Francisco, it's a real problem. So it's, you know, the idea of community-based planning and design to make sure that there is a definite connection between the people who live there and the improvements that are made there funnel back into the community, right? So that everybody in the community benefits. And there are a lot of strategies that are not my forte, but that are being used out there to help make that happen. So where the money and the improvement that happens in the community stays in the community.
A question out there from Stephanie regarding being paid for growing trees. Does anyone who wants to try that need to have a license to do so?
Interesting.
In order to sell them, yes, I think you need a nursery license or nursery permit to grow as a nursery to sell trees if you grow them.
Yeah, I'm not sure the nursery rules. I would tell anybody you're going to need a business license in the state of California, among many other things that are probably not even related to the nursery part of it, in addition to.
But if you just want to grow trees, you can do that.
Backyard.
Or give them away as gifts. Like it's.
Leave them on doorsteps.
Or plant them in vacant lots.
Exactly.
I think I'm caught up right now on questions, but I can ask a couple of questions to both of you. You know, I know there's going to be a lot of students out there that are probably just thinking like, hey, should I get started and become a first-time student? Maybe it's your undergrad. Maybe you're looking to go back to grad school. What motivated both of you to follow this as a career? Like what gave you the courage to take a leap of faith and say, I'm going to pursue this as a career versus thinking that maybe this is something that's more of a hobby? When did you take it seriously? What encouraged you to take that plunge?
Eric?
Yeah, so like I kind of alluded to that earlier, but I was kind of lost. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I know I wanted to be creative. I was studying fine art right out of high school. I went to a community college for several years. After studying for the first few semesters, I realized you can't really get a job with a fine arts degree unless you're incredibly talented and well-connected. So at the same time, I was getting interested in gardening, and that really got me into studying horticulture and botany at the junior college at the same time. And I kind of put two and two together and figured that landscape architecture, like I mentioned before, was a combination of art and science. And that's led me directly to landscape architecture, and it was a perfect fit. I love so much about this profession. It's really great. And as I said, I really enjoy and I look forward to every day of work. Every project is different. There's new problems that need to be solved. You're learning constantly, and it's just great. So, yeah.
And it's the same thing, you know, like I alluded to, it was really a one-time experience. I was studying botany and actually rhetoric, doing a double major at Berkeley. And that one experience that I explained at the beginning of the talk it really was an epiphany. And you know how sometimes things fall into place. 2 or 3 weeks after that happened, I happened to meet a landscape architect who worked at EDA at the time. And I told him what I was studying at Berkeley. He was also a Cal grad. And I told him, you know, what had happened up there. And he looked at me and he said, what the heck are you doing studying botany? You need to be studying landscape architecture. And I had never heard about it before. And fortunately, Berkeley had a undergraduate program. So I just transferred majors, and my sister became a landscape architect as well. So we are a family of landscape architects. And for me, the path has been a straight one. I got out of undergraduate and found a job in a recession in 1979, I guess it was. It was one of many recessions. And really it was no looking back, just continued on. So, and like Eric, every day I wake up and I find, especially during the pandemic when it was a lot of doom and gloom, I thought, I really think I am fortunate, knock on wood, to be able to be educating the next generation of landscape architects, because it's all forward motion. It's all thinking about the future, and it's all about making a better future. And really, that is an important way to live, thinking positively about and thinking that you can improve the world, make it a better place. So it's a great profession. I say sign up.
I have a question here from Jason for you all. Let me go back and find that question. The chat kind of jumped on me.
Uh-huh.
If you've worked with cities to implement greater green space and invest in urban tree planting, what were the most effective selling points?
I would have to say the long-term, well, you've got both short-term and long-term benefits, right? I mean, you've got the immediate impact that the changing or the evolution of a space, that you're changing it into a green space, would engender more positive action, which would affect the long term. And as those trees grow, I mean, that's another one of their characteristics. They are never staying the same. I mean, wind blows, the leaves, change. Over a year, new growth happens. Over 10 years, the tree actually can change forms. Even the leaves in some species actually change form from a young tree to a mature tree. So things change over time. And as a newly planted or newly vegetated space matures, the benefits become more apparent. And I would think it would inspire more change. So I don't know that answers your question. You want to give it a shot, Eric?
Yeah, well, in my experience, I mean, I had a really great experience with that, is that we were working with a community group in San Francisco where they were actually fighting to plant more trees. They wanted to green their streets. They wanted to improve this green infrastructure themselves. So there was a group of people that did our jobs for us to promote tree planting, and they were telling us like the tree species that they were interested in, all this, and they did their research. And so we were helping them select species and placement and things like that. So I think there's a lot of cases where the public is getting more educated. They're becoming more aware as this country and society learns to value green spaces more. I think people are going to be kind of wanting to invest in planting trees themselves. So I think it's not just us convincing people, it's a little bit of back and forth. I think the biggest place that we can convince people is in government and passing laws that require a certain amount of green space in public areas and developments.
Well, and Eric, I mean, see, that's so important. I mean, you brought up a word, that really, that maybe we should change our profession to landscape advocacy, because, advocating for green space, advocating for, things that can't speak for themselves, such as, not, animals, wildlife, trees, rivers, streams, soil. Soil. We so underrate and underestimate the importance of soil. So what our profession does through action and through our designs and through our education really is advocacy. And like you say, that our, the public is becoming more aware of their environment because we have to, but
Yeah.
there's still so much to do. So.
Absolutely.
All right, just a couple more questions here before we wrap up. So at what point in an architect's design process does a landscape architect get involved, or where do those two intersect?
That can vary. In a best case scenario, it would be from the beginning, where the landscape architect and architect can coordinate their design visions and plan to be a cohesive match. Most cases, it's at the very end, write that construction documentation. They'll bring a landscape architect on board because they realize they can't do that aspect of the design. They might not have the skills, or they might be required to hire a landscape architect. And in most cases, it's at the end, and things don't work out as best as they could, fortunately. But ideally, would be as soon as possible, those two work together.
Yep. Yep. I would reiterate that word for word, right from the beginning. That's the ideal.
From experience, that's exactly how it goes.
And I got another question here as we're starting to wrap it up. This one was, in your opinion, is there an ethical component to using native plants in landscape architecture?
Absolutely. There's a huge issue especially in California, just because I'm familiar with it, of the planting of invasive species, ones that are beautiful trees like that Mexican fan palm that is planted everywhere, but escapes into the wilderness. And you'll go on a hike up somewhere very wild, and you'll find these native exotic plants kind of just taking over and pushing out native species. And in all cases where we can, as landscape architects and designers, we should advocate for planting native species. There's some cases where it might not be possible, like in San Francisco, in very dense urban conditions. It's very hard to find a native tree that can tolerate just the absolute squalor of a 4x4 concrete pit and find something that can thrive. So there's some cases where we have to find a species that might be exotic, but is not invasive, that will not escape into the wilderness. So it's up to us to educate ourselves, be familiar with the plant species that may or may not be invasive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And plant natives as much as possible.
Yes.
Yeah, sounds good. And so, hey, as we're wrapping up here, one of the things I just wanted to make sure to take the time to do while we still have our attendees, I know we're winding down, but there's so many questions. I guarantee you people have a ton of questions about the career, the programs, what to do, etc. So it doesn't have to end here. What I'm trying to invite everybody to do is I'm going to go ahead and put my email out there, but I can definitely be your switchboard. If you do have questions about the program, if you want to get to know more about how to join the university, or if you're going to be an undergraduate student, graduate student, international student, if you just have some questions for the department, I want to welcome you all to send me an email. I do this every week, and I get tons of emails from students all the time. Some of them are just saying, hey, I want to talk more about the program in detail. What my department does is we meet with students one-on-one. And what we do is we go over information about their background, what their career goals are, how much they know about this industry, what do they see themselves doing in it. And even if you don't know a lot about it, it's okay. We can help you to explore and learn more about how to get started. Part of our process is to meet with students and take as much time as we need. Most of the time our meetings take about an hour. But what we end up doing from that meeting is giving you some honest feedback about, is this the right career path for you? We want to try to help make those recommendations. For those of you that maybe would have portfolio work, or you've drawn things before, whether you have portfolio work or not, it's totally okay. But anything that you may have, we'd love to be able to take a look at it, review your skill set, any experience you may have. I know Heather's team looks at portfolios all the time, whether it be for just course placement, waiving courses, transfer credit, or just getting advice on where to start. So, but we can definitely help students with experience and with no experience. that's the way the programs are designed, to try to help teach students how to be successful. So I do want to welcome you to send me an email. If we can try to connect and set up a time to talk, I'd love to, to try to help everybody out here with just setting up time to learn more about the program, and also help you to basically move forward if this is something that you're exploring to do for your education or future career. So, and I got another question here I can maybe throw out you guys before we go. How do landscape architects make sure that certain plants do not bring pests or predators into the built environment?
So for many cases, when we as landscape architects and designers, when we have a delivery of plants from the nursery, in ideal cases, we will inspect that delivery, not just for invasive pests or predators. We'll inspect it for quality. The size of plants is what we expect and what we ordered. But when you find a plant that is possibly has a pest or a host in it that could affect the landscape, you will definitely turn that down, have it returned to the nursery immediately and exterminated immediately. And that will be reported by the nursery in their records and be reported to by, I think I don't know if it's a food and the US, the California agency for whatever that management, got it.
I think it is the FDA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if they track a known invasive pest, they'll keep track of that. And then, because sometimes nurseries will order it from like Hawaii or something, or Mexico, and that'll be brought to California and then brought to your job site. So there's sometimes that things get lost and things slip through inspections. So it's up to landscape architects are almost like the last the last eyes on the plants before they go on the ground. So it's actually a pretty important job that we have.
Good.
Awesome. Well, hey folks, as we're wrapping up, I just wanted to say one more time, thank you so much for your time to both of you. Awesome presentation, Heather, Eric, also to you. I loved actually just seeing the different trees and the colors and how you bring it to life. And you could definitely tell you've drawn those things 9 million times, because it definitely flows really quickly. So I hope people had fun following along and they learned something cool today. But definitely a really cool program and a really, really awesome career. As both of you, as everybody, has expressed tonight, you're very happy with what you're doing. And obviously it's fulfilling. If this is something you have a strong interest in, it can be a really cool career for people. So, but I'll go ahead and I'll sign off on my end by just saying, please reach out, send me an email. I'd love to connect with everybody and see if we can try to help you out. And in the chat, if you guys don't mind, a big thank you to the 2 stars tonight, Heather and Eric. If everybody here wants to give them a big thank you. Once again, I reiterate this to everybody. A copy of this recording will be sent to everyone. So whatever email that you use to RSVP for the event tonight, you will get a copy sent to that email sometime tomorrow. So please feel free to stay in touch. I'd love to hear from you. If anybody here has questions or you want to explore the university, I'll be the first person to connect with you on that, okay? So thank you both, Heather. Thank you, Eric, and everyone behind the scenes.
Thank you.
Tim, thanks for helping out behind the scenes. And Judy and John and everybody back there in marketing, thank you all so much for your time tonight.
Great. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Heather.
Okay.